Windows event timer, which I actually now have the utility for that thing. So here's our timer tool, and bam. Right, so and if I adjust that up, less like there, and this is just like how Windows. I forget what it's meant for, but it's meant for like timing events in various like applications and that kind of thing. So like video playback applications will crank up you just saw the little notification. It just cranked up the notification that popped up with the firewall. It just cranked up the event timer to I think 0.5 milliseconds or whatever. And video playback will do a similar thing. So that kind of thing. We can't see the spike anywhere in the software. Right? Like, no monitoring software is telling us, hey, you've got a pretty massive voltage deviation just kind of happening. And the reason for this is the software is simply not fast enough, and in fact, most of the sensors in your system aren't really designed to be fast enough to pick up on this kind of stuff. Now, the interesting thing that happens when we run Prime 95, with 32K FFT size, is, so we're running Prime 95, and you can still see the event timer spike, right? That's the upward spike that we see over here, right? Like that's this spike. That's still the event timer spike, and basically every 15.625 milliseconds, like it ticks along at 64 hertz. In a previous video I made a mistake. I think I've actually made that mistake in several videos where I say it ticks along at 16.25 milliseconds by default, but no, it's 64 hertz, so it's less than 16 milliseconds. But anyway, I don't actually care about that. Like the thing is, I don't care that much at what rate it is. It's just like that spike is normal. That's just Windows doing Windows things. Now, when you're running Prime 95, the spike goes upwards instead of downwards because when you're sitting idle on the desktop, your CPU isn't doing anything, and then Windows goes, hey, could you, like event timer, we need to check if there's anything to do. And that, is basically a spike of activity on the CPU. It runs a bunch of instructions, so the CPU pulls a bunch of power, and we get that voltage spike downwards because suddenly you need to pull, like the CPU suddenly pulls in a bunch of current when previously it wasn't pulling anything. Now, when we're running Prime 95, we're pulling 200 amps constantly until the Windows timer goes, hey, stop running Prime 95, and we get that upward spike. Because it stalls out the workload, so suddenly all of that current that's going into the CPU has nowhere to go, and it translates into that upward voltage spike. Now, this is called overshoot. When the spike goes downwards, it's called undershoot. And we're not really like, well, if the spike, if the spike is going downwards and we're like going below our target voltage level, it's undershoot. If it goes over our target voltage level, it's overshoot. And overshoot really not a concern from a overclocking stability perspective. It might be a bit of a CPU lifespan hazard if your motherboard is especially bad. If you have a motherboard that's actually good, these spikes don't get very tall unless your motherboard is really, really crap. And I have tested some incredibly crap motherboards where I've seen upward voltage spikes going into the 1.7 volt range. Which was concerning, but the CPU still survived even that, because 14 nanometer Intel chips are very, very tough. Yeah, the downward spikes are really bad for your stability. Now, the spikes we get when I move the mouse around, those are even more extreme. And, oh, there we go. Now I got the blue screen. I didn't want it now. I wanted to capture one of the damn spikes. Why can't you do that? It's the curse of having a camera turned on, right? If you're not trying to record, it's going to do exactly what you want. And as soon as you start recording, it does the opposite. Because right now, it would have been really convenient if it didn't just crash the moment I touched the bloody mouse. Though, admittedly, that was mostly because I let the CPU warm up a lot. So, anyway, we're going to open up Prime 95 hardware info. I plugged in the second fan again because this time I would actually like the slight increase in stability that we get from having the CPU cooler. So I'm just going to run small FFTs. We're going to scroll down. Actually, I don't know why I'm scrolling down. There's no point. We've already seen the VRV out sensor. You already saw what's going on with that, where with medium LLC we're stable. But no, I didn't want small FFTs. I wanted 32K. 32K specifically is really bad. I mean, this looks really bad as well, but it's actually not. It's not anywhere near as hot. 32K is a, just like for this demonstration, it's a very convenient workload to use. So we get those nasty downward spikes, and I'm just going to capture one with, put the scope in single mode. Now we have one of the spikes. Hopefully this is it's not a good looking one. There we go, that's a better one. But, that is the perfect spike. That is exactly what I wanted. Now we're going to take a look at this one in detail. So, I move the mouse, right? And Windows freaks out when you move the mouse. I don't really know why. For whatever reason, if you actually like grab a window or you're manipulating something around the screen, these spikes are actually they don't exist. I think it's Windows trying to predict what you're about to click on, and for some reason, like it's dumb, but yeah. Theoretically, you could also have an application that has this kind of behavior just built in as part of its programming. You know, maybe a game has a weird way of handling input and also has really heavy physics calculations using AVX, and you could maybe get something like this with that. So, yeah, or you could just have a game that uses AVX for, like, I don't know, decompressing files or something, and if you're on the loading screen moving your mouse, it will crash if you're as it's decompressing the files. But anyway, so, you know, we're running Prime 95 here, right? Before the upward spike, right? This section right here, this is just Prime 95 doing its thing, Prime 95 doing its thing, and then we get that upward spike. And that's Windows going like, oh my god, the user moved the mouse. What is he about to do? What is he about to do? And then Windows does some stuff. And we can clearly see that the stuff it's doing pulls less current, right? It's pulling less current than Prime 95, because the voltage level right here is lower than right here, right? If we move the trigger around, this is hovering around sort of the 1.28 volt range, whereas this part right here is more like 1.24 volts. So there's definitely a decrease in current draw going on here, and you know, Prime 95 might just go and push into the background a little bit, so it might still be running there, but ultimately I think that's mostly Windows doing stuff. And that stuff is at less current draw than the Prime 95 workload. Now, the problem comes along, and so far everything's fine, right? Like, there's not really a big deal, because if we're not running Prime 95, like, during this, we're not doing as much work, so the CPU is not under as much load, it's less likely to crash.
User 32!
Concerned about that. But the problem comes along when we get to this point, right here. And the problem right here is that now what's happening is Windows has, you know, sort of gone like, okay, I've done my prediction of whatever, like, done my crazy mouse handling stuff. And now it's time to start Prime 95 up again. And Prime 95 pulls, you know, in the background you can see in hardware info, Prime 95 pulls a lot of current. So if we go from pulling less current, so we're on Ultra Extreme, I have it set to like 1.23 volts. I would assume we're probably pulling less than like this part right here, I would expect that to be pulling less than 100 amps. So if you go from pulling less than 100 amps to suddenly pulling almost 200, you get a downward voltage spike, because the VRM literally, actually, like, it's not even the VRM. You could have a crazy fast VRM, ultimately you still have a power point in front of that. Like, there's not much you can do about this. So you get a voltage spike downwards because physics sucks for basically everything you want to do. Right, you want to go to space, physics screws you over. You want to regulate the voltage to a CPU while it's pulling varying amounts of current, physics screws you over, and you get a big fat downward voltage spike. The problem here is, at this point, at the bottom of that point, Prime 95 is already running, right? It is running at this point, and that voltage is a lot lower than what it normally needs to run. So this right here, that bottom of that spike, is what crashes out Prime 95. Alright, that's what causes the calculation errors, because for several clock cycles, as we're running our AVX instructions, our CPU isn't getting the voltage necessary to run at the frequency we're trying to run. In this case, 5 gigahertz. And so yeah, that's why when I'm moving the mouse around on Ultra Extreme LLC, this is what's causing it to crash on Ultra Extreme LLC, but this does not explain why Medium LLC is more stable. Anyway, I did also want to demonstrate that if I grab a window, the spikes go away. So right now we're at 10 milliseconds per division on the oscilloscope, so I'm going to put the trigger out of the way. So if I just move the mouse, we get the downward spikes, right? Yeah, good. I'm going to grab our, you know, core temp window, and spikes are gone. So yeah, Windows freaks out if the mouse isn't actually doing something, which is interesting to say the least. Like that is, you know, very bizarre. And you can see the window's like freaking lagging and everything, but nope, there's no downward spikes there. But as soon as I let go of the window, downward spikes. But grab the window again, and Windows stops freaking out for some reason. So that's very strange. The funny thing is though, like ultimately what is causing the transient to me doesn't really matter that much. The fact that the transient exists, like there's a like basically the fact that Windows can cause this is like there is a software scenario where some software could cause that kind of behavior, and it'll cause instability. So you don't want your CPU, like you don't want your core voltage set up in such a way where, you know, you're going to have problems with, well, random blue screens whenever you move the mouse. Or, you know, the software might just randomly do some weird multi-threaded schedule. Like, it might manage its workload in a weird way where it suddenly jumps from not pulling much current to pulling a ton of current, and then you crash. Which is what happens when I move the mouse, but you know, there's other scenarios that can create the same thing. You just have, for my purposes here, this is the most convenient demonstration that I've come across. Anyway, so if we bump this up to 1.26 volts and we run medium LLC instead of ultra extreme, the stability improves massively, and this is for a very simple reason. So now, when we're pulling less current, the core voltage goes up. And this means that ultimately, like, we can't actually do anything about that downward voltage spike, or the upward voltage spike for that matter. Like, that upward voltage spike is directly proportional to, you know, the design basically is entirely dependent on how is the VRM designed, how is the power plane designed, what kind of capacitors are used, you know, where the capacitors are located, how are they connected, that kind of thing. But there's not really, like, there's nothing you can really do as a user to like adjust that upward spike behavior. So that spike just is a feature of your VRM, and there's not much you can do about it. For a given amount of current, you know, for a given change in current draw, so going from 200 amps to 50 amps, you're going to get a spike of X. And if your VRM is better, that spike will be smaller. If your VRM is worse, you're going to get a bigger spike. Same goes for the spike in the downwards direction, where if you're going from 50 amps to 200 amps, well, you're going to get a, you know, some size of spike. If your VRM is better, the spike's going to be smaller. If your VRM is worse, it's going to be bigger. If if the change in the current, if you go from 100 amps to 200 amps, the spike will be smaller as well, assuming the VRM is the same. So we can't really do anything about the spike. It's just tied to sort of, you know, the scenario and the physical capabilities of the voltage regulator. But yeah, so now we're going to run 32K, but with the medium LLC, right? And you'll notice, so our voltage, instead of going up, has gone like down, right? Previously at idle, our voltage would go down because, again, there's impedance between my measurement point and the CPU substrate, like the actual silicon of the CPU. And now we get, you know, like this looks right now about the same as when we were on, like, as long as I'm not moving the mouse, this looks exactly the same as when we were on ultra extreme analysis, or at least it looks like that to me. I've not actually, like, honestly, I could have noted down the statistics that I have running along the bottom of the oscilloscope screen, but yeah, we didn't really think that too much, did I? Anyway, you know, some voltage is reading like 1.29 volts, or all of our cores are pretty happy. But when I'm moving the mouse around now, you'll notice, yeah, we're still getting those spikes, but they don't go as low. Like, yes, they still go below our average voltage, but they don't go anywhere near as low as they were going before. And here's the reason for that. So I'm going to set the trigger, and zoom in a bit. I'm going to capture me a spike. And I realized that the horizontals all screwed up probably. Did I set it too low? There we go. So, actually, oh man, I nailed it. This is a really good one. So, as before, right, if we scroll through this, we have prime 95 doing prime 95 things for the initial part. Then we get to the spike here, which is Windows going like, oh my god, the user touched the mouse. Stop everything. I need to, like, predict what the user is about to click on or something. And that's the whole, like, like, I'm assuming that's what Windows is doing. I don't actually know what it's doing. I was just like, that's the only thing I can think of. Because otherwise, like, why doesn't, because if it wasn't for that, like, if it wasn't trying to predict what you're about to click on, why, if you're actually, like, manipulating a window, do you not get the spikes anymore, right? That's the only reason I can think of, is just like they're trying to predict your input or something. Anyway, you get this, you know, so we get this low current workload over here because, you know, first we get the stall out spike, which there's nothing you can do about that. It's always going to be, like, the height of this spike is just dependent on the change in current draw. But then our voltage levels off at a higher level than Prime 95, right? Like, Prime 95 was, again, running at around that 1.28 to 1.29 volts. But then the Windows doing Windows things is running at around 1.32, 1.33 volts, right? So actually, well, 1.31 to like 1.33 volts. So at a higher voltage. And what that means when we get over to the downward spike is, well, now our downward spike, the height of this should be basically the same as when we're at ultra extreme LLC. The height of the spike should be basically the same. However, because we have shifted our spike from starting at, previously it was starting at like 1.24 volts and dropping down to like below 1.2 volts, that was really bad for stability. It was bottoming out really low. And at this point, like already in this area, we're running Prime 95, right? That's the whole reason why we're getting that downward spike, is this is Prime 95 coming back to full current draw. So we are running heavy instructions and we're running a lot of them. And so we need the voltage, because otherwise we're going to start making errors in the calculations. Now, the thing is, since we've shifted the initial starting voltage up significantly, right? We've gone from 1.24 volts initial voltage up to around 1.22 volts initial voltage. Well, our spike is now going to drop the same amount of distance, but it's going to bottom out at a higher voltage because it started at a higher voltage. So this is basically like, if you're following the car, right? If we can think of the CPU as the car in front and the VRAM as the car behind it. If the CPU decides to brake check the car behind it, there's sort of two ways we can make sure that the car behind, like the VRM doesn't crash, like the VRM car doesn't crash into the CPU car. And one is we could make a better car, right, where it's better at braking, but that's very expensive and very difficult. Or we could just have the VRM drive way behind the CPU card. So when the CPU card decides to slam on the brakes, we've got plenty of time to respond. And that's essentially what the extra V group is doing. Because we're sitting at a higher voltage, when the load hits, well, the hit isn't as hard, right? We have more time to react to it because we're starting at a higher initial voltage. So the stability is better because, you know, yeah, our actual average load voltage is exactly the same. Our power consumption is basically the same. Our operating temperature is the same. But our stability is much increased because now our minimum voltage while running Prime 95 is significantly higher. So we're no longer in that scenario where we have a bunch of clock cycles which aren't getting the necessary voltage to not make calculation errors. So yeah, and that's what's going on with this. Oops, what did I press? That's what I get for not looking at the scope UI. That's the help menu.
Nice.
How do I get out of here? No, that's not what I want to do. Okay, there we go. I wanted to run again. So, yeah, that's what's going on with the spikes here. Now, I wonder if we can get one normally around. Yeah, not normally that low. There. Well, anyway. So, yeah, that's why you shouldn't use Ultra Extreme LLC. And you honestly shouldn't even use Extreme LLC or Turbo. Even medium here isn't actually ideal. So the interesting thing is Gigabyte, for their Z490 motherboards, added a new voltage mode. And I do realize this video is now over 30 minutes, but I think the new voltage mode is really cool. So we're going to take a look at it, because it is really cool. Okay, horizontal centered. So right now we're in fixed V-core, and we're going to switch over to override V-core, and we're going to go 1.3 volts. Now this is some, like, override V-core, as far as I'm aware, is Gigabyte has basically done something, like, it's I don't know how to describe it, but basically it's like a not stupid version of adaptive vCore, as far as I'm concerned. So I like override vCore, because override vCore is super convenient to work with. So we're going to be punching 1.29 volts. And like the thing with override vCore is you do have to like, you're going to have to dial it in. And for your LLC, if you're using override, you have to use standard. If you start using, well, okay, it's not true that you have to use standard, but you start using the higher LLCs, there's no benefit to using override mode, and you should just, like, you shouldn't adjust LLC. Auto, normal, standard are fine. Anything other than that, not fine. So that's why we're using standard LLC, and then we're punching 1.29 volts. And this is actually dynamic voltage. Like this is some form of dynamic voltage.
What the hell?
Choose it so that it actually matches your super high but it's really cool because, like, for once, there's an adaptive mode that isn't a complete pain to set up. Because on Z390, I messed around with adaptive mode voltages because a bunch of people were telling me like, oh yeah, you get way more stable overclocks, and I was like, well, yeah, because you can run, like, essentially, if you spent enough time with it, you could get the same effect that override mode has, where you can run, you know, full VRAM, and so not get any, like, voltage regulation problems, but it took forever to get you'd have some weird overvolt, like your voltage would go up and down based on ADX loads, and it was really annoying in my opinion. I didn't like dealing with it, and so I wasn't a fan. But this thing is great, because we're just going to punch in 32K, and vCore is reading 1.284 over it. I think I set it a little bit low. Yeah, I did set it a little bit low. You know, we're getting 1.226. Actually, no, I pretty much nailed it. Right, so we're getting about the voltage that I wanted. Actually, it looks like we are a little bit low. But now, right, the crazy thing is we don't get downward spikes at all. Like when I move the mouse, it just goes up. It doesn't go down anymore. So now our we literally, like the whole issue with ultra extreme LLC was you got that massive downward spike. With medium, you still get a downward spike, it's just nowhere near as big, so the stability is a lot better. But in override voltage mode, it's gone. Like there's no downward spike because this has full VRAM, and I think ultimately, if we look at our vid reading right now, okay, no, the vid reading is not like okay, that's not what I was hoping for. So yeah, I'm still not like I don't know how Gigabyte implemented it, but it is so cool in my opinion. Like, and if you disable all your power management, it actually behaves like static voltage, which is great in my opinion. Like for the sake of overclocking, like consistency, having no power savings running is super convenient. So yeah, I am really impressed by override mode because this is insane. Like there is no undershoot whatsoever. Right, so I'm just gonna try capture and okay, wait, I'm gonna get one of them. There, right? There's our mouse. Do it like there's no downward spike. Right? Like Prime 95 comes back under load and it's just nice and controlled return into load. There's no undershoot. Like you don't even really have any overshoot, right? Because again, you're on full VRAM. So basically, if the the voltage goes up and that's annoying, but like there's no it's not actually going beyond what the VRAM is told to aim for, which is why you don't get that like returning to a lower voltage level. You still kind of get that, but not anywhere near as much as without override mode. So override mode is just super freaking cool. Like this is awesome. Like this is so much more convenient to work with than adaptive mode. And you get all of the benefits that adaptive mode ever offered. Because like you could dial like on Z390, if you spent enough time messing with adaptive mode, you could get this effect. It was just really fiddly to get it into this condition across like a bunch of different workloads and have the voltage be consistent. Because adaptive mode would I'm not a fan of adaptive. Let's just put it that way. And I've not been a fan of adaptive voltage for a very long time, but this right here, I'm a fan of this. Like this is like, look at the voltage regulation. It's amazing. And it's it's me-proof, is one way to put it. Which, to be fair, is, you know, pretty idiot-proof. And if we run Cinebench, right, like, I think Cinebench would actually end up running at a lower voltage. Oh, no, wait. Yeah, no, actually it's running at still a similar voltage. Like, it's pulling way less current, and it's not running, like, that is the thing, is, like, I don't want the voltage going up when I'm running an AVX load. I don't want the voltage going down when I'm running well, since, to be fair, Cinebench R20 is an AVX work. Oh, no, this is R15. So that's not even AVX, right? So what I really like about this is just, like, the voltage behavior is super consistent. Which is just like why I didn't like adaptive mode, because it was just like the voltage was going all over the place depending on what you were running, and it's just like, no, that's really annoying to deal with. But now, like, you just have to go through, like, you set it to override mode, and then you just walk the voltage up. You leave your LLC on standard, and you're golden. Like, this is freaking awesome. I'm so impressed. Like, it just doesn't make mistakes. It's incredible.
Yeah.
This whole time hardware input's been running and it hasn't picked up anything lower than 1.21. And actually, even on the oscilloscope, we've never seen the voltage go below 1.23 volts, which I'm very happy about.
150% coverage.
Yeah,
Geen errors.
You have like full adaptive voltage with like idle power savings. Like sometimes you will. Hey guys, Velzoid here, and today we are going to be doing a video about why blower heat sinks suck so badly. And this is just like a thing that I wanted to talk about for, like, I think I've shot this video in the past, and then it never turned out good enough, so we'll see if I'm more successful this time. Anyway, so we've got our two bricks here for our GPUs, and this one's going to be our blower example, and this one's going to be our axial card. Whoa, we're just going to do a two-fan design, right? And, okay, no, that's terrible, but what? It doesn't need to be super accurate. So, we've got our two GPUs here, and the basic problem with blower heat sinks is that basically any cooling system is about having, you know, as large a heat exchanger as you can possibly have, and then flowing as much coolant through your heat exchanger as you possibly can.
Oh wow, she was B1.
Because the more coolant you run, like, because basically with your, like, the bigger the heat exchanger, the more coolant you can potentially run through it, or the longer the